Hello and very warm welcome to the Arise interview, 60 minutes of big questions about the big stories from the news and beyond, and with fresh insight and critical analysis. I am Christian Ogdo. Thanks for joining us, and we're live in the nation's capital, Abuja. Coming up in the next hour, TETFUND, the largest holder of research grants in Nigeria, has always focused on providing transformative intervention in public tertiary institutions in Nigeria, using the large funds at its disposal for project management. But amid the coronavirus pandemic, the agency has been provided the opportunity to provide 12 COVID-19 and related infectious disease molecular laboratories in each geopolitical zones in the country. Today, we'll examine the efforts of TETFUND in Nigeria's tertiary system amid a pandemic. The Executive Secretary, Tertiary Education Trust Fund, Professor Suleiman Bogoro, coming up in a moment. And later, as Nigerians continue to battle the economic impact of the coronavirus pandemic, stringent measures are now being put in place by the Federal Inland Revenue Service to make property owners collection agents for 6% stamp duty from tenants. This move has met with strong criticism by Nigerians as they criticize the government taxing system, saying they are not getting value or dividends of democracy despite the widening tax net. Others have talked about the need to reduce the cost of governance rather than exorbitantly taken from the people. For a better understanding of Nigeria's tax system, we'll speak to the President of the Federal Capital Territory Tax Practitioners Association of Nigeria. As you may have heard, Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari did increase the Tertiary Education Trust Fund research grant from its initial 3 billion naira to 7.5 billion naira for the year 2020. This fund comes amid the coronavirus pandemic and provides a unique opportunity for the agency to set up 12 COVID-19 and related infectious disease molecular laboratories in the 6 geopolitical zones in the country. The latest approval makes the agency the largest holder of research grants in Nigeria, and to sponsor the numerous research proposals from universities and the National Agency for Food and Drugs Administration and Control, NAFDAC, the Board of Trustees of TETFUND did approve over 200 million naira. I'm delighted to be joined by Professor Suleiman Bogoro. He's the Executive Secretary of the Tertiary Education Trust Fund. He's a prolific researcher on education. Very warm welcome to the Arise interview, Prof.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be on here again.
Great. Yeah, Prof, let's start off by asking you that it looks as if TETFUND is having what one might call a paradigm shift from physical infrastructural development of tertiary institutions to what is being seen as content development. Why is this shift, Prof?
Thank you very much. If we recall, what is TETFUND today was originally ETF, Education Trust Fund, and but from 2011 it became TETFUND, acronym for Tertiary Education Trust Fund. And it's also recalled that the ETF was a product of negotiation between government and the university unions, specifically ASU, in the early 90s, between 1990 and 92. And at that time, it is recalled that absence of physical infrastructure from lecture halls to, call it classroom, offices, and all the infrastructure, of course, Senate buildings, libraries, those basic infrastructure that you associate with universities were either non-existent largely, or if they did exist, they were in such deplorable decrepitude, it was unacceptable. And that is why when the negotiation came up between 1990 and 92, that produced an agreement, and eventually ETF emerged 1993, Education Tax Fund, and later in 1998, it was changed to Trust Fund. Of course, from 1998-99, the funds were applied until 2011 across the education firmament, including the basic subsector, which, as well as monotechnics and all that, it was felt like the point was being missed as to the essence of that special non-budgetary funding window. It was meant for physical infrastructure, would be the first signpost to show that there was anything beyond a secondary school in our universities. And so, no doubt about it, between 1998 and 99 to 2011, the emphasis was physical infrastructure. And when now TETFUND came into being, when the law was amended to focus on the tertiary subsector, and the law was specific about those beneficiary institutions being public universities, polytechnics, and colleges of education, it was expected that there would be further improvement. And indeed, there is no doubt that from 2011 to today, there has been manifest, non-deniable, as it were, emergence in large numbers, as it were, across the institutions. And it is very obvious that there has been physical transformation, so much so that a number of institutions, including state-owned universities, polytechnics, and colleges of education, in fact, more of them, that there is much higher TETFUND presence in terms of physical infrastructure than other interventions, sometimes from the budgetary capital grant, as well as occasionally Central Bank of Nigeria, some banks, some individuals, spirited individuals, as it were, alumni, and so on and so forth. But clearly, it's been TETFUND. The presence is very, very obvious. But then, over time, with improvement in both numbers and quality of physical infrastructure, it was decided amongst stakeholders, and leading to last year the Board of Trustees of TETFUND making the case, and they took a decision very firmly that there should be a paradigm shift, more for content components. And by content component, we have about 14, 15 intervention lines of TETFUND. They have been increasing by the day, and that there was need to put more emphasis on the content. And of all the list of content, of course, you can imagine, research is one of them. The other one, academic staff training and development. And we can go on and on, manuscript development, journals publication, academic publishing centers that are about to be completed, and they may come into operation any moment. So there was justification for that, and the reason is simple. In rating and ranking of universities globally, the emphasis is on faculty. The emphasis is on faculty, and you could not miss that, because in the context of faculty, you are talking about the personnel, quality of personnel. You are talking about professors who are not just dishing out numbers of publication, but there are patents that lead to product development. But more importantly, that they are solving problems of society, of economy, of technology. And if that were the case, it was very, very important that the appropriate refocus be effected. And that's why the Board of Trustees approved it, and we move forward from there. And it is very clear, Mr. President responded by raising the National Research Fund of TETFUND previously with a maximum of 3 billion to 5 billion last year, and this year in the 2020 budget, 7.5 billion. And it is recalled from the 5 billion, we got 128 research grants that were approved. with a budget ceiling of 50 million for each. So that content component is to refer to the aspects that is outside the physical infrastructure, because those are the things that matter. Talking about academic staff training and development, that's capacity building. Now we've introduced postdoc. Initially it was just training for PhDs and MSc. Now we've introduced postdoc because more university holders are now lecturers in our universities. In fact, the average for some of the institutions, you are talking of 80, 90, or even 95%. Some of the universities are the first generation universities. They hardly take anybody without a PhD any longer as a lecturer. So the emphasis has been very clear. And so Mr. President's approval of higher grants for research is in direct response to the request by stakeholders and with the approval of the Board of Trustees that recommended it. So that is essentially the issue of the paradigm shift for content.
Well, that's really great, Prof. A lot of submissions there looking at the 14 interventions. But it's like your leadership of TETFUND is really moving with the times because of the new normal. And one will be asking that with the paradigm shift, is TETFUND now going to be looking at virtual learning and how tertiary institutions will be assisted in this area with the presence of COVID-19?
You are on point with that question. I can tell you, the Honorable Minister of Education, Malam Adamu, just before the COVID lockdown in March, issued out a statement and said he would want the institutions to migrate to e-learning, as if possible, within 9 months. And I can assure you that that process has started in earnest. It's very demanding in terms of investment. There's no doubt about it. Central pool funds are being applied to particular institutions, but each institution has its annual allocation anyway. And it has been decided that what we call the annual allocation, at least 1/3 should go for ICT facilities to effect deployment of ICT for e-learning inconsistent with global practice. You will notice something that as a consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic, there is no doubt that Nigeria could not be left behind. Presently, one would notice that a number of normally physical meetings are hardly holding any longer, and that virtual meetings are increasingly becoming the norm. We hope so, although for a number of engagements, you still need some level of physical interaction. So there has to be a balance, but we are conscious of the need to provide those facilities that will make virtual engagements possible in line with global practice. And in Nigeria, we could not do anything otherwise.
We would want to take some messages. When we return, you'll continue, your submission on what TETFUND is doing about virtual learning, assisting Nigerian tertiary education. You're still watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead. Stay with us. You're welcome back to the Arise interview with me, Christian Ogodo. We're live in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. I still have with me Professor Suleiman Bogoro, who is the Executive Secretary of the Tertiary Education Trust Fund, TETFUND, as a prolific researcher on education. Prof, yeah, good. Your fund has taken copious steps in assisting tertiary institutions with the new normal that we're faced with. What kind of, development of ICT, you must be collaborating with the Ministry of Communications and Digital Economy. You must be collaborating with the Nigerian Communications Commission and, of course, the National Universities Commission. What are some of these collaborative efforts, yielding in this regard?
Thank you very much. You know a lot about what we have been doing and intend to do from your statement and question. Yes, we have to work with partners. For us in TETFUND, our interventions are largely guided by the requirements and priorities as dictated by regulatory agencies. For universities, of course, the National Universities Commission. For polytechnics, the National Board for Technical Education, NBTE, and for colleges of education, NCCE, National Commission for Colleges of Education. And we are guided largely by them. But of course, there are differences in terms of specific priorities, capacities between institutions. I can assure you that similarly, we are working in partnership with a number of agencies outside the education ministry. For instance, like you rightly said, the Ministry for Digital Communications and Digital Economy. We have an MOU we signed with NIDA. We have been working with Galaxy Backbone, NCC, of course. You can never do anything in respect of ICT without taking benefit of a number of prescriptions and regulatory requirements by the NCC. And we are working with many partners, including, of course, international ones, service providers, the Googles of this world, etc., etc. But we are not losing sight of some of the challenges associated with funding. Specifically, let me say this. You will agree with me of all the infrastructure requirements for ICT, broadband is a key aspect. And capacity size, the capacity of the broadband is a major requirement. And well, experimentations have been done in the past to a kind of have facilities that provide the platform for ensuring very reliable broadband services, expanding them as it were. But more recently, it does appear most of the institutions have decided to go solo, depending on the size of their pockets, so to say. And that is one. The new chairman of the board of trustees of TETFUND, Alhaji Kashim Imam, has come in to initiate a fiber optics facility at the University of Abuja to demonstrate the way forward. And we are looking forward to replicating some of these as we go forward. Consultations are being made with relevant consultants and experts. So you better imagine that it's a huge menu of requirements, both from the technical, scientific, and engineering perspective to resources. So we are taking them one after the other, but we believe it is not beyond us. It's not beyond this country. And like I said, all relevant parties and partners that we can get both within the country and beyond the country, we are engaging them. And where we have services that are cheaper than others, you can be sure that we are likely to patronize the former rather than the latter. So I think basically we are looking forward to consolidating on the initiatives, and we hope that we will continue to provide those things that we need for Nigeria to operate at the same level in a digital economy, or the larger question of describing modern economy as knowledge economy. You have to do with digital facilities. You have to do with ICT, technology, and science. And so We are conscious of that, and I think whatever we can do from our own end, we will continue to do, because Nigeria cannot be seen to lag behind.
All right, Prof, great way to land there. But let me ask you now, you're not taking it slowly at all, particularly with the, huge money that the president has approved for research, because that's one of the key cardinal points for the TETFUND. And you've garnered 128 researchers already working, 50 million naira ceiling, depending on the quantum of the research. How far and how well results that you've been getting from the researchers?
Very good question. Let me start from something that I would like you to know before I proceed to results, and if we may put it more appropriately, impact. Let me start from, we have three thematic areas in our research. We have science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Well, science, technology, and innovation, the STI, and we have the cross-cutting, and of course we have the humanities and social sciences. Those are the three thematic areas where we receive, evaluate, and approve research grants every year. And somehow, along the line, by deliberate policy, so it has turned out, and of course, it's a global trend anyway, for quite a long time and even going forward. The emphasis is on the STEM disciplines. And let me say this, I hope it gladdens the heart of Nigerians to hear that, having reviewed the research grants from TETFUND since we started that intervention a little above 10 years ago, that 35% of the research grants have been in the field of medicine and pharmaceuticals, largely. And I think that it gladdens our heart. Now you imagine, in the era of COVID, that demonstrates that we must have been going the right direction. And it is our desire so. The other area that we are hoping we will invest, we want to attract more interest in, is agro-based research initiatives. Of course, the environment, climate change, and all that. We hope we are consistent in this regard. In fact, of the 128 research grants this year, I think about 2-3 were in respect of COVID research. Infectious disease, etc. I mean, beyond COVID, Lassa fever, Ebola, and we are conscious also of ensuring that we do not forget some of the diseases that have been with us all these years. The malaria challenge, the cancer, whether it is the breast cancer for women or it is the prostate cancer for men, those things remain with us. And like I said earlier, the importance of our deliberately emphasizing research is like this. In fact, with the emergence of COVID, that is a global threat to everything from our normal life in homes to culture to operations. It is very clear that we got it right, that we should be increasing funding for research. You better imagine, and with emphasis on the areas of science, particularly medicine, pharmaceuticals, whether for therapeutic drugs or ultimately for vaccines. I think we are getting it right. I've always said one thing, that you better imagine that, who knows, we don't know how much longer it could take. Sometimes the lockdowns are relaxed. After some few days and weeks, they are returned to starting point a few weeks or a few months earlier. We've seen them happen. For Nigeria, we know that a number of our...
Prof, again, I have to intervene here, Prof. I'm very sorry to cut you midstream there. We want to take some messages. When we return, we'll continue the aggregation that you're making in research efforts by TETFUND. You're still watching the Arise interview. We're going on a short break now. Stay with us. You're welcome back to the Rise interview with me, Christian Ogodo. We're live in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. I still have with me Professor Suleiman Bogoro, the Executive Secretary of the Tertiary Education Trust Fund, TETFUND. Prof, you were making some submissions, aggregating the three thematic area of research, which you said is basically on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. While you conclude on that, let me just quickly ask you again, why is the arts relegated to the background? Arts like literature, like history, like culture, or why is there no prize initiated by TETFUND, or is TETFUND going to initiate a prize for outstanding researches, publications, and the others? Prof?
It's a welcome digression. I wish that came up later, but let me quickly address that. You heard me mention humanities and social sciences as one of the three thematic areas, but I said, as a matter of policy, and I tell you, it's not just Nigeria, it's global phenomenon. The emphasis is on STEM. The reason is simple. It is the sciences that shape virtually every other thing, most this thing. But that is not to say that the other disciplines are not relevant. Indeed, they are. For instance, not instituting prizes. What we did in TETFUND, remember we announced 12 centers of excellence recently. We will be giving you the details very soon. The location of the 12 TETFUND centers of excellence as inaugural, 2 in each geopolitical zones for first, second, and third generation universities. And I can tell you, yes, majority were in STEM, but it may interest you to know that one, and it shouldn't be a surprise, that the one for Abuja University is on governance and leadership. And I hope that makes sense. And for University of Ibadan is on interdisciplinary studies. So definitely, we're not jettisoning the other disciplines. But the truth is that there is a preponderance need for the STEM-based disciplines to lead. It is a global phenomenon, and Nigeria could not be different. There is no doubt about it that there is no discipline that is not required. So no mistake about that. All disciplines are important, but that we must prioritize. And that is, like I say, it is a global trend. The most competitive nations, it is the STEM-led disciplines that guide and shape competitiveness. Having said that, let me proceed quickly to explain a few more things in respect of what I said we've been doing in respect of the research. We announced recently that we are providing PCR molecular laboratories across Nigeria. I'm happy to announce that as I'm talking now, we have made available 14, and I think a 15th one is just emerging, if I'm able to recall, at the Medical University Ondo in Ondo State. And most of them have been activated. That is part of our contribution. Like I said earlier, talking about content component, talking about ranking of universities. It is faculty that is fundamental. And faculty, after talking about the personnel, you have to talk about the research facilities. From the laboratory infrastructure to the soft touch, call it, and then the heavy duty engineering equipment and all that. Those are fundamental. And what we are doing in respect of medicine, we are also moving in for the purpose of providing medical simulation, research, and training facilities in our colleges of medicine. These are the modern requirements for training of medical doctors and for research. We cannot operate differently. And now, finally, let me address the key question that you asked at the beginning. That is the effect, or what I call the impact of the research that we've been funding for quite a while. Yes, I can tell you that we are concerned about impact. One of the ways we are doing is, as I'm talking to you, there is a proposal for a package that will be used to assess impact of research. And we are in consultation with relevant experts in that area. But look at it this way, even ordinarily, you are talking about outcomes of research that make meaning in solving problems of technology, of society, and of economy. We are conscious of that. In fact, that is one of the criteria being used to approve any grant. If a grant does not appear, or a proposal rather, research proposal does not appear to have a coherent plan to get outcomes that are solving problems outside there, beyond the four walls of the university, polytechnic or college of education, then it's not worth being funded by TETFUND. That is why we are emphasizing, and we're making the point, we want to see more patents emerging from outcomes of research. We want to see commercialization and uptake of research so that I think intellectual property will be appreciated and rewarded in so many ways. Precisely why, finally, TETFUND, as I'm talking now, we are hoping to inaugurate the TETFUND R&D Standing Committee. This is a committee that has carefully identified Nigerians, both within and beyond, including diaspora, of course, in some of the most critical areas of need of our country. We're bringing them together to work on a committee that, based on their experience and their profile, they will be able to, use their experience, use their knowledge at the highest cutting-edge level to suggest the way forward. And talking about R&D, the institutionalization of R&D is what has been responsible for Nigeria's, or the lack of institutionalization of R&D has been responsible for the lack of competitiveness of our economy. If we continue to just dish out research outcomes, and we're not looking at how they are taken up by industry, precisely why TETFUND, National Universities Commission, NBTE, and NCCE have been working in partnership with the industry. Last year, we had a meeting in Lagos, a roundtable with the Economic Summit Group, Manufacturer Association of Nigeria, etc. And it was a great success because at the end of it, recommendations were made to consolidate on ensuring that we have research outcomes that solve problems of society. If we lack the capacity to empirically judge the capacity of research outcomes to make a difference, then we have failed. So you are absolutely right to have asked that question. We are going forward looking at how we will consolidate on the institutionalization of R&D, and let's get it right. We are hoping that a national R&D foundation may emerge from the recommendations of that committee, and should that happen, we are likely to have the largest R&D, in other words, research fund, through legislation of the National Assembly that will make available funds, not just for academic staff training, for PhD, for instance, as we have in some national research fund in some countries in Africa, but that we're looking at the bigger picture. The bigger picture is beyond just the PhD. We'll have opportunity for postdoc, we'll have opportunity for bench work, we'll have opportunity for exchange visits, and fundamentally funding of what I call most applied and deep molecular level, if I would jokingly put it that way, research that solve problems beyond the ordinary. So we are hoping that our research outcome will continue to be meaningful, and if we're able to put together the evaluation criteria using the package that we are working on, it is one of the ways to show that we are attempting to improve on what we have been doing.
Fantastic. Well, the next question I would have been asking is, what are the challenges you're having? But it's obvious that you're not having challenges because you're a strategist, you're a great educationist, and a prolific researcher. So what I'll be asking you before we let you go is, what are your visions, in the next 5 years, whether you want to even extend it beyond that medium and long-term vision for the TETFUND?
Thank you very much. The vision of TETFUND is consistent with federal government vision of looking at the bigger picture, that we are not operating in silo, TETFUND, whatever we're doing, intervening, that we are looking at the bigger picture of national aspiration of this government towards consolidating on what we have been doing. In other words, for instance, let me give as an example. Yes, about 8-9 years ago, it was only about 40% of Nigerian university lecturers had PhD. And as I'm talking now, it is in the region of 70 to 80%. Roughly, we are looking forward to getting the correct figure from the National Universities Commission soon. We know that number of PhD holders is much lower for the polytechnics and the colleges of education. Well, but the circumstances are clearly different. The first generation university, I said it, for some of them, the University Ibadan of this world, they are virtually they're not employing anybody without the PhD. And so the circumstance is quite clear. So we are hoping that other universities will catch up, so that if there is any expansion, additional funding, we now know what to do. If you are supporting, for instance, those that do PhD within the country, the postdoc window is to give them opportunity to go mainly outside the country, to have some, maybe 1 year as it were. In some cases, it could be abridged to 1 semester, but 1 year for them to have a touch of facilities that we may not have here. And at the end, let's bring back the knowledge, and as we continue to invest on provision of research infrastructure, particularly for the sciences, laboratories, etc., that it will contribute to those elements that are key features of determining the ranking of those universities. And that is absolutely important going forward. So that is one area. But let's not also forget that we recognize that there is still deficit in terms of some fiscal infrastructure. And the Board of Trustees of TETFUND last year decided that we should go in strongly to support the construction of hostels, either on our own or where there is established PPP with some of our beneficiary institutions. That can be done with private entities. And we are hoping that we are able to do that. It will go a long way in improving the teaching and learning environment for our students. And indeed, everybody else. I mean, I've always said, I remember during our time as undergraduates, we had students both at undergraduate and graduate level from across Africa and Europe and America. And they would stay in the hostels because the condition of the hostels, one, there were adequate rooms available, and they were of quality by all definition and ramifications of assessment. Now, why can't we attempt to do that? If we want to attract, today I've always said it, United Kingdom, a major aspect of their foreign exchange earning is from school fees by foreign students.
Absolutely.
And they're able to do so
Prof.
because they have good teaching and learning environment.
Yes, Prof. Thank you so very much, Professor. Suleiman Bogoro is the Executive Secretary of Education, Tertiary Education Trust Fund, TETFUND, for speaking to us. You've shed so much light what TETFUND is doing, and I'm sure the nation will be happier for it. Professor Bogoro, thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're still watching the Arise interview. We'll go on a short break. When we return, we'll be looking at the new tax regimes in Nigeria. Stay with us.